What was the most shocking thing the quiet kid said? Nothing. Let me explain. I took a class with the Virginia Tech shooter 1 semester before the shooting. The class was called Contemporary Horror. It was a one-time elective offered by my favorite professor. We read horror novels and watched horror films and discussed the craft of creating scary stories, but also how they reflected or represented their era's fears. It was a great class. There were only about 15 students, and it was discussion heavy. Cho was one of them. I honestly never noticed him, even in that small class, until halfway into the semester. He wasn't quiet, he was silent. So, on the day we all finally noticed him, our professor asked him something directly, and Cho just stared at him. I can't remember the question, but the nature of it meant silence was potentially an acceptable and funny response, so we all laughed. Except Cho. He just kept staring at our professor. Our laughter awkwardly died, and after a few moments of uncomfortable silence, our professor just said, "Okay," and moved on. It was so strange, but I forgot about that weird moment until after his rampage. That professor later told me that Cho's papers had been disturbing, but the nature of our course meant the envelope was being pushed a bit, and it never had been bad enough to suggest he'd do what he did. That professor was a good man, and he admitted he struggled with not blaming himself on some level for 1, not identifying how severe Cho's mental health problems were, and 2, for the graphic and terrible nature of some of what we watched in that class, which may have inspired Cho. He knew that it was BS, but a part of him couldn't help but feel some blame. It was terribly sad. Story 2. I was best friends with the quiet kid in middle school. It wasn't so much shocking as the stupidest thing I've heard him say. He got this 1,000-yard stare all of a sudden and just said, "I can't remember what color my dog is." Story 3. In high school, there was this really quiet girl named Grace. She was a pleasant person, but wouldn't say anything more than hi or sorry unless you asked her something. Even then, she'd appear terrified. It was at prom, and I was in the parking lot of the venue we had prom at. I lost a contact and had run to my car to grab my glasses. In the parking lot, Grace was smiling and walking from her car. She looked at me, laughed, and said, "Ryan," her prom date, just fingered the F out of me. I still laugh about it to this day. Story 4. Playing rugby, hooker fails completely at line out. Someone shouts jokingly, "Does anyone know any good hookers to replace Patrick?" Quietest guy on the team, never hear him say anything, says, "Maybe Patrick's mum can help." Proceed to fall on floor. Story 5. So this one kid who barely ever said 2 words one day asks the teacher for the time. It was at some after-school thing and there was no clock. The teacher says the classic "time for you to get a watch," which for some reason was funny to everyone else. The quiet kid doesn't laugh. He looks the teacher dead in the eyes, and once everyone quieted down, he says, "So are you gonna tell me the effing time or what?" We were in 7th grade. Story 6. This was when I was in my first semester of college 2 years ago. There was this girl who never said a word. The teacher would ask her questions, she would just not say a word. I can honestly never remember her even making a noise. One day, the teacher got upset. He felt like she was ignoring him and that she was being disrespectful, so he, like an ass, said, "Did no one teach you how to speak?" She stood up, walked up to the whiteboard, grabbed his marker, and wrote, "I am mute, you foolish effer." Apparently, no one ever told the teacher that she has a disability, but she was one badass for taking his marker out of his hand and writing that. Story 7. In junior high in the mid-'80s, the game Trivial Pursuit was all the rage. We played it in math class one day, and this kid, Gary, who never said anything at all, totally spanked everyone else by answering every single sports-related trivia question. He got a lot of attention for it, and I believe he walked a little taller after that day. I don't think I ever heard him say anything else, but I did see him sitting on the bleachers at a few sports events. Story 8. We were chillin' at a bar in Prague, and someone rolled up some hash oil and tobacco and passed it around. The quiet kid hit it and got even quieter. 20 minutes later, some aggressive, growling black metal comes on, and out of nowhere he yells, "Kill your parents!" We friggin' lost it. He was pretty happy with himself. Story 9. Wow, this question literally came at a perfect time. I was just thinking about this, and it was sophomore year in high school. This kid was so odd that no one ever really noticed him, but one day he's sitting across from me at a table, and he sees this one girl in really tight shorts, and goes, "Damn, I could have my head up her ass for months." It was, pretty shocking. Story 11. This D-bag kid who constantly screwed with people was in line with the quiet kid and the quiet kid's friend. The quiet kid is a bit overweight, so when he goes up to the lunch lady and gets his chicken nuggets, the D-bag says, "You don't want extra nuggets, big guy?" The quiet kid out of nowhere just starts ranting. "No, I'm all set, but what are you up to this weekend? You want to hang out, grab some food, maybe bang a little bit? I like to be on top and you look like a bottom. What do you say? You want to bang?" The entire line is dead silent. The D-bag starts getting all pissed off and acting like he's going to start a fight, and the quiet kid says, "Okay, fine, you can be top, baby." The D-bag kid leaves to the entire line laughing their asses off at his expense. No idea if the quiet kid was actually gay, or he just knew that jokingly suggesting that the D-bag was a homosexual would upset him more than anything. But I do know he left the line with his delicious chicken nuggets and a huge smile on his face. Story 12. In middle school, the quiet kid, Steven, had an arch rival, Robbie. In class, Robbie always seemed to come out on top of their little scuffles, mostly because Steven couldn't really formulate or execute a burn or comeback. He just rolled over and let Robbie get his insults in until the teacher stepped in. One day, I was walking behind Robbie after that class, and Steven quietly crept up behind him. Before Robbie could even turn around, he got as close as possible and said, "If I was to come into your house and kill you while you were sleeping, I doubt anyone would even notice." Then he disappeared into the darkness of the science hallway. I don't remember the exact words, but that was pretty damn close. I was about 55% shocked, 30% laughing hysterically on the inside, and 15% terrified. Robbie never made fun of old Stevie again. Story 13. I was the quiet kid. I go to a private school, so there's a fair share of spoiled, privileged kids. In any case, while most people are pretty nice, there's a lot of complaining. Anyway, I was in English class, which is one of my favorites, except that I don't really have any friends in the class. I trained myself not to say anything, because when I did, I was usually met with groans and a chorus of, "He's doing it again." The teacher was a nice, young, pretty English major who had also gone to a private school, so she was used to well-behaved kids. To her delight, my class is that. The only negative quality about most of the students is, like I said, complaining about completely inane things. Somewhat early in the year, when she was still under the impression that we were all well-behaved, uniform young men and women, during a quiz, a random girl decided to start whining about analogies. Understand, this is the kind of class where talking during quizzes is socially acceptable because it's understood that no one is cheating, or dumb enough to cheat by straight up asking people the answers. I had gotten pretty sick of the complaining, so after she finished her rant about analogies, I pulled out an old line from Dave Barry, thus ruining my class's state of grace forever. "And that's why I started doing heroin." At the time, I thought it would be pretty hilarious, but instead the entire class just stared at me and the shocked teacher couldn't find the words to say. No one in the class really knew me well, so they had no reason to believe I was joking. For the rest of the year, no one complained about analogies. Story 14. We sat in the classroom in, I think, 5th grade. My friend had done a PowerPoint presentation about Eminem. He talked about that he lived in a trailer as a young boy, and the quiet, straight-A student stands up and says, "Just like you," and asks to use the toilet. No one understood anything of what just happened. We live in North Europe. It's practically no one that lives in a trailer here, and my friend definitely didn't. Story 15. Our quiet kid was Tommy. Tommy never said anything, ever. Out of all the lunches we ate at our table senior year, I think Tommy was the only one who never told a story or even added anything to the conversation. He always just sat in the same spot along the wall eating his lunch and laughing occasionally at our jokes. One day, we were sitting in the cafeteria eating lunch and sharing stories like we always do. My friend Raymond had spent the previous night with a girl named Haley. She was a 2-year younger, but already had a reputation of hooking up with a lot of different guys. So he was telling us everything that went down, kind of bragging, even though nobody was really impressed as we were all aware of Haley's reputation. Anyway, Raymond gets done telling his story, then proceeds to pull out his sandwich. I think it was some sort of fish. It didn't look very appealing to Raymond or us, so he says, "This looks disgusting, but I'll give it a try anyway," and proceeds to take a bite. In pipes Tommy. "Is that what you said about Haley last night?" Everyone explodes into laughter, drawing the attention of the entire cafeteria. Raymond is just sitting there mid-bite, stunned. I'm bent over in pain from laughing. Others are on the floor. One guy ran to the bathroom because he thought he was going to puke from laughter. Even Ray had to laugh. I never noticed him laughing, but Tommy had this sly grin on his face for the rest of lunch hour. Story 16. We were having a BS elective course, and we ran out of stuff to do, so we wound up having to do story time. My friend walks up to the front and starts telling us about how once he got pretty badly injured. Basically, he was walking to his friend's house, slipped on some black ice, face planted on it, and his front teeth tore off most of his front lip and broke off. He ran into the house babbling and bleeding. He was like 11 and was missing part of his face, so he wasn't 100% coherent at the time. And his friend's mom takes one look, runs into her bedroom, locks the door, and doesn't do anything until my friend's dad arrives and starts screaming at her. My friend says he still has no idea why the grown adult woman couldn't handle the situation any better, and we all start making guesses and BS psychoanalysis. Cue the quiet kid raising his magnificent head and blessing us with enlightenment. Maybe she just needed to take care of herself real quick. What? Story 17. I was the quiet kid in this scenario. I'm a skinny white kid and I was working at Jimmy John's with a bunch of outgoing and loud black kids. While we were closing, I was doing the dishes and everyone else would be doing their jobs. When we would close, they would blare rap music through the restaurant speakers. They would always rap the words and be real loud during the songs. So during one of the songs, when it got real quiet, I just yelled at the top of my lungs, "Woo! This is my shit!" And then I just went back to doing the dishes. Everyone looked at me as if I had lobsters crawling out of my ears. Story 18. I'm the quiet kid. One day before my economics class started, this guy turned around in his desk and asked me what I thought he'd be when he grew up. He never took anything seriously and joked around a lot, so I answered, definitely an adult film star. The girl next to me started laughing really hard, and even when the class started, she didn't stop. The teacher walked over to her and asked her what she was laughing about. When she finally calmed down enough to answer, she said, "He said that Daniel's gonna be an adult film star," and the whole class heard it. Everybody, including my teacher, was staring at me with shocked looks on their faces. I turned bright red and couldn't find any valid excuse for what I'd said, and that's why I never talk. Story 19. I went to middle school and high school with this boy named Daniel. Never heard him say a word once. A friend of mine said he would whisper sometimes. The night of our senior party, we heard some music coming from over the corner where the karaoke machine was set up. At first, no one really noticed him because people had been singing on it all night and most people stopped paying attention. But this was different because no one was singing and the music was playing. The DJ stopped the music and started the song again. Daniel was standing there looking frightened, but this time when the song started, he began to sing. Everyone in the room stopped what they were doing and just crowded around him. He wasn't a great singer by any means, but 99% of the people in the room hadn't ever heard him talk. When the song was over, everyone started clapping and cheering, and he walked away with a big smile on his face. Story 20. I was in marching band in high school, probably 7 years ago now, and we had this huge muscular guy as our brass instructor. He would always yell at us to nail these chords or "you're not playing loud enough." There was this little Asian trumpet kid that was so innocent and nice he barely ever spoke a word. One really, really hot afternoon, our instructor was being especially loud and said, "Why don't the trumpets blow hard enough?" Dead silence across the field as all the brass are waiting for next instructions. Then we hear, "Why doesn't your mom blow this dong hard enough?" from the quiet trumpet kid. Needless to say, we all laughed, got some push-ups, and laughed some more. Story 21. So there's this one kid I know who is very quiet. He almost never talks, but when he does, people listen. He always looks very calm, but I heard a story about him once. He was on the baseball team in high school, and one game just about everything had gone wrong for him. He had had a hard time by several pitches, had a hard time in the field, and basically just had a crappy game. His last time at bat, he strikes out. He walks into the dugout, then pulls off his helmet and chucks it as hard as he can. He picks up his bat and just starts going ham on everything in the dugout, splintering benches, smashing water coolers, denting metal support poles, everything. Meanwhile, everyone else is just in shock, basically trying to stay out of the way because he isn't paying attention to what he's hitting. Finally, he calms down, but I sure don't want to make him mad. Story 22. So this isn't so much what he said. The seniors played locker pinball with the underclassmen. It's exactly what it sounds like. They bounced one guy constantly, made him late for class a lot, they'd keep him bouncing so long. Well, one day they were bouncing him and he super politely said, "Please stop, you're hurting me." Obviously, the seniors bounced him harder. Apparently, that was this kid's breaking point because he leapt onto the nearest senior who just happened to be our star basketball forward. The little freshman bit into the senior's neck and literally tore a mouthful of skin off. He just stood there with this piece of bloody skin on his shirt, growling at everyone. Needless to say, no one ever effed with Mad Dog Mike after that. Story 23. I was the quiet kid in school. My dad decides that after spending 15 years of my life in the same area/school with the same friends, he was going to relocate our family an hour away. I started a new school 2 years before I would graduate, which sucked. It was a very small school, so everyone already knew each other and I didn't really fit in. I got picked on a lot by the kids at my new school, and already having a pretty bad anxiety disorder, I withdrew pretty far into my shell. I tried to stay as invisible as possible, but I still got picked on and bullied. Until one day, about 6 months into the school year, I was standing at my teacher's desk getting held on a math assignment, and I looked up to the entire class staring at me, whispering and laughing, and something in me just snapped. I slammed my book down onto the table, closed my eyes, and just screamed at the whole class to leave me the F alone, and then stormed out of class. It was a really tough 2 more years, but I graduated, moved out of that town, and am doing better now than all of them. So you know what? F them. Story 24. I wasn't there, but in my announcing techniques class, it teaches you how to present yourself and speak for radio/television, we were filming how-to videos in the studio, and the professor was telling us past examples of good and bad projects. One in particular was done by a very shy, awkward kid who came into the studio with a friend and a metal box. He so casually proceeds to pull a bunch of knives out of the box and film his video on the best ways to use the knives in combat. He so casually proceeds to pull a bunch of knives out of the box and film his video on the best ways to use the knives in combat with very specific and effective ways to kill somebody using his friend as a dummy. He was very volatile with his movements, and his friend apparently didn't even bat an eye. The professor then explained that despite how uncomfortable it made him and the rest of the class, he had to give him an A because his presentation was actually put together really well. Story 25. I will never forget this as long as I live. It was like the perfect cinema in real life. This quiet, weird girl in 10th or 11th grade always wore this giant coat and looked messy. She was a bigger girl and had a sister who was super pretty and skinny and popular. As I type this out, I realize it sounds fake or like a movie. Anyway, this big, awkward, quiet, friendless girl shows up at a talent show at the school. People weren't being obviously mean, but there was definitely an air of WTF when she came out on stage in her big messy coat and disheveled clothes. She sat at the piano and started to play and sing and just, my God, it was surreal. She sang this haunting, bluesy tune no one had ever heard before, and the auditorium just went dead silent. I distinctly remember tearing up, and I'm tearing up now 20 years later just remembering it. Who the hell knew? Story 27. I was a substitute teacher for a year after college. There was a 7th grade girl that all the other girls adored. At the age of 13, she was already a fake tan cheerleader and thought the world of herself and cared little for her classmates. One day in the study hall, she was bragging, lying, to her friends about her string of boyfriends. The other girls were hanging on to every word she said. We'll call her Cordelia. Now, to set the necessary geography of the scene, there was a very quiet boy at the computer in the back of the classroom. He hadn't said a word all period. Anyway, Cordelia says, I just want to date a boy that's dumber than me. That way he'd do whatever I want because all he wants is, you knows. Boy, Cordelia, if you were dating anyone dumber than you would be pushing him around in a wheelchair and wiping drool off his face. Immediately, Cordelia looked at me, dumbfounded. She expected me to yell at him or send him to the office. No matter how hard I tried, I could not stop laughing. It was the most hysterical thing I'd heard all year. Story 28. I went through high school with a really quiet girl. I wasn't so close with her, but we were both in more academic streams, so I had quite a few classes with her. She came across as a sweet girl who was just a bit shy or introverted. After high school ended, she posted a long note on Facebook about how she hated everyone in our high school and was so glad to be done. That she wasn't shy at all and was sick of people thinking she is the nice, quiet girl because if I didn't talk to you in high school, it's because I friggin' hated you. It was very surprising because she had seemed so sweet before. I still have her on Facebook and it's been 8 years. I never talked to her after that. Story 29. It was Carl, the middle-aged Asian man, on the day he was graduating from our rehab program. We didn't even know it was his graduation day until he stood up to say his goodbye. We all got nervous because of the things we'd been open about. Molestation, violence, the worst things that had happened to us and the worst things we'd done. This diminutive man in thick glasses had literally never said a word. It was something like, I feel like each and every one of you is my family. No one has ever understood my pain and my struggle the way you people do. I love all of you. I mean that. I love all of you so much. Thank you for everything. Blew my 22-year-old mind right out the front of my face. I have never since doubted that the quiet ones are participating in their way as much as the rest of us. Story 30. As a couple girls from a few school years beneath us walked into the room, the lads behind us were discussing which one they'd like to bang. My mate turned round and questioned how they could find children attractive. Neither had an answer, but the quiet, almost silent lad in the back corner weighed in with, "There's nothing like fresh meat." Ugh.